It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Paul, and spoke with you last year on the Gear Up to Measure 80. And can you update me and update listeners and friends on what you've been up to? So much has happened in the last year, and tell us what's going on now.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's been the most active year in my lifetime. I've been working for cannabis reform since I was a teenager, and I'm 53 now. And we've seen more movement, largely driven by the successful initiatives in Washington and Colorado, I-502 in Washington and Amendment 64 in Colorado. They both passed with about 55% of the vote. And our Oregon initiative had qualified for the ballot, but then we got 47% statewide, so we fell a little short. But some other organizations have done polling recently that shows that there's been a 15-point swing, and that now 63% of likely Oregon voters, as of early May, would vote yes for legalization. So that's a huge swing, largely brought about by the fact that where we're sitting right now at the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers, the two largest rivers in the West. You can go about a half a mile across the river and you can have legally an ounce of marijuana. So I think that's had a huge impact on the whole political dynamic for marijuana legalization. So the initiative we worked on obtained 47% of the vote. Here in Multnomah County, we got 61% of the vote, and 63% of the vote in Portland proper. But we lost statewide. We only won 3 other counties. And we've revised our bill to try to address some of the issues. And we've come out and just this weekend at our Hempstalk Festival launched 2 petition drives. One for a revision of Measure 80 and another with that's a constitutional amendment. So we have a statutory law and a constitutional amendment. The revision of Measure 80 lays out a fairly detailed scheme to regulate cannabis, allow adults to grow their own. And the constitutional amendment just says that it's a natural right that's in the Constitution that people can possess and use cannabis, and the state can regulate it for public safety. It's a very simple 2-sentence initiative. And so we plan on putting both of those before the voters. We were hoping perhaps that the state might draft its own regulation scheme. And we worked on a bill in the last legislative session. We worked with a group that was more active in directly lobbying. But the legislature had a bill to regulate it. We had a very productive legislative session here in Oregon where we regulated medical marijuana dispensaries, some of the best, it is the best medical marijuana regulation model that was passed by the legislature. They also changed the marijuana penalties and made possession of between 1 and 4 ounces a misdemeanor where it had been a felony. And they added post-traumatic stress to the list of medical marijuana conditions and made several other positive changes. So it was a very productive legislative session, and they looked at this bill to regulate it. Right now there's a movement by a couple of legislators. This guy Barnhart, who is in charge of the Revenue Committee in the House, another guy, Peter Buckley, down in Ashland, who's in charge of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and Floyd Przansky, who's in charge of the Judiciary Committee in the Oregon Senate in Salem, Oregon. And they're pushing to have the legislature draft and refer a regulatory model to the voters in the same election we're shooting at. So there's a potential that if the legislature steps up to the plate, that we won't go forward with our regulatory model, kind of the revision of last year's Measure 80.
Right.
And we'll let the legislature refer to their process. But if they don't do that, we're stand ready to put that statutory model on there that's been revised since last year to deal with some of the issues that were contentious in the campaign. and then we have the constitutional amendment as well. And I'm also working on 3 other non-marijuana initiatives. So not only do I have 2 marijuana initiatives that I'm the chief petitioner and co-sponsor on, there's 3 non-marijuana ones. One that says people have more rights in corporations and government and artificial intelligence in the near future. So, and that we have an inherent right to privacy, to exercise privacy. So that's one constitutional amendment. Another one is that we own our own genome, and DNA is open source code that can't be patented. Now, we're a state, but of course you have to think globally and act locally. And this is something that we can put into the Oregon Constitution and hopefully start a global debate where they can't continue patenting DNA. It needs to be open source, just like open source software. So that's what I call the Genome Protection Act. And then the last one sets up a state bank, where all public money goes into the state bank, and instead of us giving our money to the banksters and the too big to fail banks, where they charge us money to borrow it back, the state has to have it, and it has to be invested on growing the state's economy. The state of North Dakota has had a state bank for 100 years, and it's been very successful for them. They didn't have a recession over the past 2 decades the way the rest of the country has, based on the popping financial bubbles. So working on 5 initiatives, and in Oregon you pay by the hour. You cannot legally pay by the signature. So it's actually, there's an economy of scale. We can do 5 initiatives for basically the cost of 2.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's brilliant, and clearly, Paul, you have so much more important things to be doing, and you're up to, and a few minutes of your time is very much appreciated. And thank you so much for putting on this great festival.
I'm about to go to Spain and speak at the Expo Grow next Saturday in San Sebastian, Spain. I'm going to panel with Ben Drockers of Sensi Seeds and the Marijuana and Hashish Museum in Amsterdam and Barcelona. I'm happy to hook up with him. I haven't seen him in 15 years, but they are going to fly us there. My wife and I both, and put us in a hotel for a while.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's so cool. I'm not in the business of like bashing anyone, specifically or anything, but I happened to catch an interview that you were doing earlier in the day out here, and I thought it was interesting, some of the questions that were coming from the reporters and stuff, and I just wanted to give you an open floor, which it seemed like they weren't, or trying to pin you down.
Well, they are sent on a job to get the story their editor wants them to run. So I respect that, and they can ask any questions they want, and we've got an open event here. I guess I have just received some information about a couple of the things in the local coverage. Apparently they found someone selling sweet treats or something that they implied had cannabis in them. I don't really know about that. I don't go around and check out all the booths. That's not my role. And I'm also not the enforcer. Exactly. But, they did say something that this shows why the state needs to regulate this. There's a brew fest and several alcohol-related events that often have a lot of violence and problems, but those are regulated by the state, and this is not regulated by the state. They've abdicated responsibility to those least able to exercise it. The kids and the substance abusers who will enter that sort of a market, by and large, But people who really don't realize everything they're risking in today's legal environment. But I'm hoping the state will regulate it, and so we're putting out a proposal, and if the legislature wants to move, I'd be happy to step out of the way, but we've got several constitutional amendments that we're going to put on the ballot and try to get the people of our state to enact.
I'm not going to leave anything that important up to the folks down there in Washington or in Salem, for that matter. And God bless you, man, for what you're doing. Keep up the great work. Is there anything else that we missed that is most important to you? You want folks to know? Anything
well, if
else,
I
Paul?
wanted anybody, the most important thing that I could tell people is that hemp, cannabis, marijuana, it's the same species, And the main reason it's illegal is because of hemp fuel and hemp fiber. It were these economic interests that realized that if they made up this myth, they used this word marijuana, which was based on anti-Hispanic racism, and they sold this as a deadly new drug. But in actuality, the prohibition was based on these lies. In actuality, it is the oldest crop. It's been cultivated for over 12,000, perhaps 30,000 years, and we've co-evolved with it, and our civilization has grown up with it, and it's not only the oldest crop grown by humanity, it's also the most productive. It produces more fuel from its seed oil and biomass, more food from its seed protein that's left over after you press the oil, and more fiber from its stalks and stems for canvas, rope, lace, linen, paper, fabric, building materials, and it's the most productive plant for food, fuel, fiber, and medicine. So to take the oldest crop and the most productive crop and prohibit that one is evil, and that's why I'm motivated to try to change it.
Absolutely. Paul, thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.